Welcome back. In this video, we're going to add the last couple of controls to our mud node group. So the first controls I want to add in here are going to be related to our displacement. They're going to be two controls that are going to generate slightly different noise textures for our displacement. So the way that we're going to do that is we're going to use the factor in this difference node, and this is going to determine how these two noise textures are mixed together. So let's take this factor and plug it in up here, and we'll change the name of this to mud breakup 1. Now the default of 0.5 and the minimum and maximum of 1 are perfectly fine here. Next, let's move this over a little bit, and let's find this next mix node. And again, we have another factor set at 0.5. We'll drag and drop this in here. And once again, we'll just go to factor and we'll change the name of that to mud breakup 2. Once again, defaults of 0.5 and a minimum and maximum of 1 are perfectly fine. And let's tab out and check these settings. So you can see on our mud at the moment with our default values, it looks quite nice. We can take this mud breakup 1 and reduce that down, and we get a different looking mud. We can take our second one, decrease that again, everything is flattening out. We can increase that up to get a different effect. We can increase the first one up, get a different effect, take this one down. So just between these two different controls, we can get quite a lot of different variations on our mud texture. I'll take both these values back to 0.5. Now the next thing I want to point out is, let's take our water level all the way down. And you can see at the moment we have the same level of wetness across our entire material. Now you may be wondering why we didn't set up wetness to go with water level. And that's because in certain situations, maybe you want all your mud to be dry, even if it's close to water. Or maybe you want all your mud to be wet, even if there's no water at all. Let's take that water level back to 0.2. And let's tab in, and we'll go to this color ramp, which is what is controlling our roughness at the moment. So with our default water level of 0.2, we have a position on our black flag of 0.26, and we have a position on our white flag of 0.46. So these are around about 0.2 apart. And if we have a control that changes this black flag, we want this white flag to move as well, but we only ever want them to be 0.2 apart. So I think it's time for a challenge. Okay, so it's time for your final challenge of this section. Your challenge is to add a control using a driver to adjust the wetness level. So you'll need to copy a driver to each of the flags and write a scripted expression for the white flag. Choose appropriate default, minimum and maximum values. And just as a little hint here, choosing the correct maximum value here could be really important. And finally, test out your new wetness level setting through your node group. Pause the video, have a go at that, and join me in a moment and I'll show you how I would do it. Okay, so this was quite a tricky challenge. Your challenge was to set up a driver for these flags. So first of all, let's add in a new control over here. Let's hit plus up here, and it's duplicated mud breakup 2. We can just change the name of this to wetness level. And at the moment our default is at 0, that's fine. We'll take our minimum and make that 0.2. And our maximum here is going to be 0.8. So this is one of the tricky parts of the challenge. If your maximum is higher than 0.8, if you move this black flag up past 0.8, your white flag will move past 1. And that's not something that you want to do. So we want to stop that black flag moving up too high. Now let's tab out of this and let's copy this driver. So copy as new driver. We'll tab back in, go to this black flag, and we're going to paste that driver. Now we don't have to do anything else with that black flag. Let's now click on the white flag, paste the driver again, but this time we have to edit this. And again, once again, we're going to change from a type average value to scripted expression. And in our default value, we want to add 0.2. So now you can see in our color ramp with a value of 0 in black, we are getting a value of 0.2 on our white flag. And if we increase our wetness level, you can see that we can increase this all the way up to 0.8, but no higher. And if we look in, you can see our white flag is now at 1, our black flag is at 0.8. And if we decrease this down a little bit, tab back in, you can see these are still the same distance apart. This has given us that little bit of fall off where our mud values go from wet to dry. So now that we have our water level controls, our puddle, our ripple, our mud breakup and wetness level controls all completed, it's time to finally mark this as an asset. So we're going to do this in two different areas. So under the object, we can, as usual, go into our mesh, find our material and mark that as an asset. And the second thing that we can do is we can go to this drop down at the top, which is display mode. We can change this to Blender file. We can go down to node groups and we can find our mud node group in there, and we can right click and mark that as an asset as well. So the difference between marking a node group and a material as an asset, if we drag the mud material into our scene, we're going to get this setup here, which is going to include our texture coordinate nodes, our principled node, our output, and of course our mud node group. Whereas if we mark just a node group as an asset, what we'll get is when we import this in, it's exactly the same as adding a group and choosing the mud, and we'll get just this single node. So this can be really useful if you just want to bring in this one node and then plug in your own vectors and maybe mix this with some other materials before it goes into a principled node. One last reminder is you need to make sure that your file is also saved within your asset browser. And with that final control added to our mud shader node group, it's time to move on to our next section. Now the next section is going to be based around creating a lot of much smaller node groups that will automate a lot of the very common processes that we would use when doing advanced procedural texturing. These include creating node groups that generate roughness maps or dirt maps, or just distorting our UVs, or adding other very common effects. So join me in the next section and we'll start creating our own custom generators. See you then.